Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sports and Rec Committee, and welcome to those streaming online, and welcome those in the public gallery. I remind that we've just with this meeting we've got a few items, not too many items, but a few that may take a little bit of explaining or reports on. We've got the annual management plan, so I do ask that questions are kept succinct and debate on the topic. We have a apology from Rachel Rees, but she's going to be around shortly and then she'll need to leave a bit earlier. And I also believe Stuart Walkie needed to leave by about 1 o'clock. 1:30. I'd like to think we'll be finished by then. Can I have can we move to accept those apologies? Well, we've got Councillor Walker and seconded by Councillor McGurk. All those in favour? Those against? A meeting is set out as in the agenda, but we have got with the Modellers Pond, we've got Mr. Laverdis is away at present, but he'll be back a bit later on, so we may just have to juggle that along a bit further near the end when he's available to be here. So just bear with me if we have to sort of shunt that through, but otherwise pretty much as we got in there. Yeah, see, so we've got an additional to the public forum. So we've got Tamika Simpson, but we've also got Ian Goldschmidt has kindly come to speak as well. No, the only two that I'm aware of. We'll have a confirmation of the minutes as said in our papers. Oh, we're interest. Oh, yeah. True, sorry. Interest, updates of interest, so we'd assume that we've already updated our interest. Any updates and interests for this meeting? Any conflicts in the agenda? No, very good. And also, before I forget, welcome to youth councillors, Alex Hunter and Cassie Hagan. Thank you for being here. And once again, as always mention, please put your hand up, and sometimes you've got a bit of a wave out, so forth, and feel free any time to ask a question. But if you don't put your hand up, you often get overlooked, so. Cheers. So move on to also confirmation. We'll go to public forum. Sorry, we've got a public forum. We have we've got Tamika Simpson kind of here. So welcome, Tamika. And I believe you're talking about in regards to some positive ideas about the brook. Is that?
Thanks, Tim. Yep.
So I'll just give you mine. You got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we'll ask you questions, but don't be upset if no one asks you questions. It means you put it across extremely well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hoping there will be some questions. Hoping that members of the committee will share my enthusiasm for this reserve space in our city, and I know it pretty well and its history, and I'm pretty enthusiastic about going forward as Nelson gets popular, remains popular. So that's really my aim today. I've done a little PowerPoint, and thanks to the women that helped this committee help me prepare and have it available. Thank you, workers. But it's really just to keep me on track and get my points across. And you'll all, so take my number, give me a call. I'm very keen to talk to anyone, particularly on the ground in the camp. Anyone in the room, committee members, staff. So really prompted off the coverage in the media about the camp being open this year. So Chris Ward, Chris, is that you there? Hi. We've met over email, but not directly. Thank you. The camp's been mowed as well. Thank you, Chris. That's good. That person with his tents has got a mowed site now, so that's pleasing to me. So we're all go this summer. How can I help? I wondered if, just with covering the basics, we could maybe insert some flavour to the camp, because it's quite a distinctive space and it's been around a while. It's got some history, so I thought there might be a style to guide marketing. And I would be really pleased, Chris, to be introduced to the people working on it and put in some time and energy. I'm home on the farm this month. and with Dad dying this winter, I've got a bit of spare time, so I'm looking for positive ways to be involved in the town. So ideas I've got: retro, all levels of outdoorsy, and I think, is this a mountain biking club here? Oh, cool. I wanted to talk to you guys as well about coming down through the farm as part of opening up that western boundary on the sanctuary, so I'll be in touch. Got a long list. So all levels of outdoorsy, hardcore. Oh, hi, Rachel, didn't see there. Hardcore, and then you could walk down the excellent footpath down to the community garden. So all levels. No frills. I don't think we should apologise for the basicness of the camp. I think that's a real strength. And it's peaceful, so you could be quite reserved in the river reserve with the sound of it. So I was just making stuff up for the potential feedback we might get to raise the profile. Love the hardcore hill climb. So peaceful in the park, basics done brilliantly. That's a big one for me as a farmer and a landowner next door. And it's looking pretty tidy, and I see a lot of people working in there. When I was there on Sunday, it looked like some volunteers. Someone was painting the fence, planting trees, and the cleaning contractor was there too. And so right by the river. So rivers are so precious to everyone that they are in tension at the moment, but they're also really positive. This particular river and headwaters is a place that people have always wanted to be in my lifetime, so want to encourage that. So all the stuff that your council workers know. How can we get high up in the online searching for camping? At the moment it doesn't appear at all from what I've tested when you do Camp Nelson. So that's not my area of expertise. I see your council's advertising for an expert in that area, comms person. Be happy to add in some labour off expertise supplied to me to get that happening. The eyesight listing's still not there. I've got a name there, but Chris, I wondered if I needed your permission to go ahead with that piece of work to make it happen, because I'm just a member of the public. I don't have any authority apart from keenness. Website, Facebook. I wondered if we could do something on the Facebook. I'm always there taking photos. I've got historical photos. Venue for Summer City, I don't know. It's quite late in the year, I think. Yoga in the reservoir. It's a very enclosed, tree-surrounded space. I've got a photo. Yeah, the online reviews. One idea I had for maybe the council Facebook, or maybe my Facebook, if that was acceptable to everyone. Memories of the Brook Camp, photo competition then and now, photo news, you can grab stuff off there, but picnics then and now. I'd like to start having some picnics in the valley. Weddings and engagement photos were huge in photo news, and could be again, I think, in the camp. I don't know, making it up. Bonuses of the Brook Camp. As I said, all levels of active. So last summer, friends were coming through. They broke down. They were on their way to Golden Bay. They broke down and had to stay, and rang us desperately. Where could they stay? They couldn't find the Brook Camp, but we put them onto that, the phone number I think it was, and their car was broken down. So it was New Year's Eve, they got up and saw the sunrise. I'm not quite sure whether they walked down the valley or up the top, but they were absolutely stoked with their impromptu visit, unplanned. So I was thinking, leave the car behind. We've got an excellent bus service, and the drivers are real ambassadors for the town. Spoke to one last summer who was running the Tahunanui bus service into town from the camp, and he was really excited about that, so they're great. And the excellent footpath, a big investment for the town there. It's well used already by residents and visitors. It could be a real plus for people, tourists, paying to be in the valley. There's lots of peaceful picnic spots. I've got some ideas for some extra mowing. Happy to do some of that as well. I've got a mower and a weed eater if that's what it takes. It's educational. As we know, it's a registered woodland. I think that more could be made of the trees perhaps. And there's real locals right there. Again, I don't think we should apologise for what it is. I've been to lots of camps around New Zealand where there's residents, and I think that's excellent, because that says to me community. And as I said, I saw volunteers there last Sunday, and I got some ideas for some potential projects that, if they were signposted right and advertised right, could be educational and exciting too. So this is the Reservoir Pool Park. This is where I thought would be a good space for yoga. I say yoga, I mean, I always want to try Zumba, but I don't think it's a place for loud music myself. We do have that on New Year's Eve up there, but generally I don't think it's a place for loud music, so I was thinking yoga. But that's the space. That line that you can see is where the old reservoir was filled in. Well, it became a pool and then it was filled in, so that's the reservoir. So that's Photo News 1961. So this, your predecessors decided that the camp and the town could do with a swimming pool. I haven't got a photo of the swimming pool, but this might be one of my entries for the competition. That was then, now, and I'd have one in between, which would be in the 70s, 80s. The hardcore hill track, I've lost the photo. But up around the sanctuary fence over on the western side, which is where Simpson's Farm is, you can walk around what the lease calls the shared space. So you've got a photo in your packs. And it really is hardcore. You'd want to be prepared, and you'd want to really think about who was going on that walk. But for a certain group of people, a lot younger than me, teenagers and people in their 20s with energy to burn, I remember that, would whiz up there in a flash, and the views are stunning once you get up there. I don't know about mountain bikers, maybe. They might come down from the top and we might facilitate that. We've still got Dad's van. But it really is hardcore to me. That's a judgment. It might not be hardcore to other extra outdoorsy people. And there is a video there that shows more of that side of the river and the walk that I did on the weekend. So I don't know how I'm going for time, and whether you guys are all really familiar with the space, or you'd want to see my video. It's got my very loud voice over it. So
we're pretty much up for time. How long is the video? Probably
too long. So let's. You've got it in your packs, or as a link or something like that, if you want to view it after. So really, I'm here today to say I've got appetite and keenness to promote the camp this summer. I realise there's some discussions and thinking about its future. That's all cool, but I'm thinking about the summer that's here now. And I really wanted to understand your appetite and interest in this particular space, seek some permission to do some things with eyesight and your workers if that's appropriate and you trust me. I wanted to build a bit of trust because I know I've got a particular profile as being concerned about the drops of the sanctuary, so I wanted to front up. And yeah, want to start having some picnics in the brook and bring back some community and some peace. And yeah, projects, tidy up the picnic spots. There's potential on the other side of the river where people could walk that are staying in the camp, and it's away from everything and they can hear the river very clearly. The hardcore hill track walk, there's no loo up there at the moment, which is potentially problematic. We've already had one incident. Someone had their loo roll with them, so they knew that there weren't facilities. If that was potential for council, then my family would facilitate construction access through our road. Happy to visit with you in the camp or come to your offices. That's me. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Tamika. No, good point with the group using that. You call it the hardcore hill. I see there's a young fitness group, or not so young fitness group, that actually make a trip up and around and down, and then I see they get more members, mainly women, doing it, and then greatly enjoying the rest at the top, and then playing down the other side.
So is that on? How do I?
I just randomly come across it on some friends on Facebook. I'm seeing that, and that link, the link with the video. Flick me the link on email or to the other councillors, and I'll pass that around later on.
Thank you. That'd be appreciated.
So we've got question time there. I've got Councillor Walker, Councillor Fulton and Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, what a breath of fresh air. Normally at the public forum we have people raising concerns with us, and here we have a resident, in spite of what you're going through at the moment up there, who is offering to help. You've actually covered, from when I indicated I'd like to speak, you've actually covered what you'd like us to do. And I'd just like to assure you that I'd like to help in any way I can as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stuart.
Councillor Fulton.
Tamika, thank you for coming in, and I wanted to say the same thing. What a wonderfully refreshing public forum to hear from a member of the public who's so keen to retain and increase the use up at the camping ground. And I just wanted to share a little story. I used to swim in the swimming pool as a young girl. We used to have the Mount Robert annual Christmas party up there. So I have really fond childhood memories of Father Christmas coming with presents to that swimming pool site. So somewhere I will have some photos. I should try and dig them out, but it's a pretty special place, and I think there's a lot of people in Nelson who have a strong connection to the area. And I think that you're right, it's trying to utilise the retro, trying to make the most of the site in ways that we can at the moment. So really support your initiative, and thanks for coming in and offering to facilitate as a landowner next to that site how we can increase use.
Thank you.
Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through to Tamika. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I join with the others in saying how much I enjoyed it. You painted a picture with words, really, of your vision of the brook, and it was just lovely to listen to. Are there others like you with that same interest and enthusiasm and excitement?
This is the beginning of understanding what that's like, but there's certainly a lot of walkers in the valley, and I don't know, because it goes past our gate, whether they continue through to the brook. I have a feeling that hardly anyone knows about that reservoir pool park. It doesn't even have a name. I've made that name up. And I'm just thinking about the green space in the valley and the increased numbers of people living there, resident, and the affordable housing, special housing area for one, and the use of it for residents as well as for tourists. So I don't know what the appetite is. I've started with you people, and start at the top kind of deal.
Where I was leading with that was that if there are others, would you be interested in establishing something like a Friends of the Brook Camp to improve it? Because we as a council, led by the Mayor, are very enthusiastic about including the community, and particularly volunteers. I heard the Mayor say once that this city couldn't function without volunteerism, and so we're up for it. If you could gather people around you, I'm sure that this council would support you.
Yeah, that's what I'm imagining it would take. I was very pleased to see that there were a couple of people in their white ute painting the fences on a Sunday, so I presume they were volunteers. I didn't stop that day, but what I was imagining was a picnic at the reservoir pool park, and then I would judge appetite there and call for people that wanted to be involved. It may be it could be friends of the camp, as you say, Mel. It could be residents. I really am looking for a way for a residents group of the Brook Valley to be part of it, and then they're different kind of working all-day resident that I grew up with than a lot of the people that are involved in the valley at the moment. So I'm looking for a bit of balance there. So yeah, I was thinking a picnic. I'm just trying to find a day that avoids poison drop days, and say to people, hey, up for it, and collect some names. Again, it's about whether people trust me and they share my vision. I don't know if other people share my vision at the moment. I think it's just part of growing up there.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? Thank you, Tamika. I'll get Chris Ward to contact you in regards to your grateful interest in the Brook Camp and possible promotion ideas. So Chris be in contact with that, and I'd be more than happy, and I'm sure some councillors here would be happy if you throw us an idea what you're thinking of doing at a suitable time up at the camp as a bit of the gathering of people, just to have a bit of the fun and enjoy the collective space.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tamika. Very good, thank you. We've got two good mountain bike enthusiasts here. We've got Ben Pointer and Ian Goldschmidt, and we've got Ian Goldschmidt coming. You're welcome to join, Ben, if you want to give him a bit of moral support up there. We don't bike, well, most of us don't.
Come on, Mr. Pointer.
But, welcome, Ian. And like
you.
I said before, you've got five minutes, but you might get 10. Is it 10 being representing an organisation? 5 as an individual representing. So you get five minutes. And once again, I'm sure you get plenty of questions, but don't be dismayed. That's us listening very carefully and understanding fully. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. You've got a one-pager in front of you, which I circulated this morning, so I'm just going to talk you through that one-pager. So, tēnā koutou, Your Worship, the Mayor, Chairperson, Councillors, members of the public gallery. My name is Ian Goldschmidt. I'm a committee member of the Nelson Mountain Bike Club, among a number of other things. And today I represent the 2,800 members of the Nelson Mountain Bike Club. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Nelson Mountain Bike Club and the committee for having the opportunity to speak here today. I'm speaking in relation to Agenda Item 10, document R8442, which is in your agenda today. So as a bit of a background, the Nelson Mountain Bike Club's core purpose is to facilitate, advocate, promote and encourage mountain biking in Nelson. To support this purpose, the club has recently developed a strategic plan, and it's got five key clear goals. 1, to strengthen relationships with stakeholders, community groups and mountain bike club members. 2, lead the development and maintenance of Nelson's mountain bike trails and associated mountain bike assets. 3, encourage mountain biking to all Nelson community members through the running of and supporting of events and being a voice for mountain biking. 4, create display community value of mountain biking. And 5, successfully operate a commercial operation being the Wairoa Gorge Bike Park as a regional tourism destination for Nelson. One of the core activities to support our strategic plan is ensuring Nelson City Council and the Nelson Mountain Bike Club stay aligned in relation to future development of mountain biking in Nelson. Mountain biking as an activity, either as a sport or a leisure, is growing quickly, and the club believes Nelson needs to be in a position to capitalise on this growth. The aim of the MOU in front of you today is to streamline some of our shared processes, keep each other informed of what we're doing and planning, ensure a positive and constructive relationship going forward. This agreement will ensure future assets either constructed by the club or the council are what mountain biking community wants and needs, and ensure these are suitable for all members of the Nelson community. The future of mountain biking in Nelson region is bright and extremely exciting. The MOU will ensure mountain biking in Nelson is well planned and truly world class. The club supports the recommendation by the staff for the MOU to be signed by the chair of this committee today. And in closing, I'd like to take time to thank the council staff who've supported us and listened to us with the development of the MOU, and also the Sports and Recreation Committee today for taking time to listen and consider if the MOU will be signed. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you for the presentation. I've got Councillor Ward, Councillor McGurk, Councillor Laurie, I should say.
That's right.
Councillor Ward there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, he used to sit here.
Exactly.
Yeah, and people get us muddled up all the time.
A striking.
Call me Mike every day. I'm sure he gets the same thing.
It must be
I know.
that light is striking.
Thanks. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Ian. There's a lot of talk about the growth of mountain biking across the world and in New Zealand. I see that Porirua has just announced it's getting a $21 million adventure park, which will be aimed at mountain bikers and walkers. But just, I'm totally on board. But just in terms of background, is there any indication that the growth in mountain biking here or overseas is plateauing, or is it just continuing to grow?
It's a really good question, Matt. So I guess the research the club has done, and was doing some work with the Nelson City Council at the moment about economic development, and from information we see at our Wairoa Gorge Bike Park, it's growing, and it's growing quickly. So growing in all regions, from people getting into more hardcore biking, and we see that through the numbers coming through the gorge. When we developed the business case model for the gorge, we believe would be not financially viable through the winter, and it'll be supplemented through the summer. We've more than broken even every month of the year, and it continues to grow. And I think everyone's seen the development of e-bikes. A lot of the major bike manufacturers now are seeing, I guess, sales of e-bikes outstrip any other of their other bikes. So I guess the bandwidth is getting larger and growing. exponentially.
Okay, and another quick question through the chair, if that's okay. How overall, when you consider council and also you know, private commercial interests, how well does Nelson support mountain biking? Because we hear from a lot of people that, you know, mountain bikers get heaps, but if you compare what happens here to other mountain biking destinations, how do we compare?
I guess maybe some clarification. What do you mean by how do we compare?
Just in terms of, so through the chair, like reading that Pororua is about to embark on a $21 million adventure park that's being built by the same people who built the Christchurch Adventure Park. I don't see things happening on that sort of scale here, so I'm just wondering how we compare to other places that people want to go, like Rotorua, other places that people want to go mountain biking.
Yeah. So I think I'll answer in two ways. One is, how do we compare in terms of the trails here? Are as good as anywhere in New Zealand? Certainly in the upper end, so what we would call the grade 4 and 5. We're doing a lot of work with council at the moment in developing the grade 2-3 trails, so the rebuild of Codgers and a lot of the local Nelson work. In terms of some of the assets, we are behind some of the other regions, so you know, Christchurch is a good one, Pororua is another one, Rotorua is another location which we're behind. But I guess that's the purpose of this MOU, as we see it, is so that we are better aligned. That in the past, the club's been trying to achieve some stuff, the council's been trying to achieve some stuff. It hasn't always gone well. And so by bringing the vision together, which fits within our strategic plan, I think we'll catch up.
Thanks. Councillor Fulton, Councillor Barker.
Oh, thank you for your presentation. Another refreshing, positive presentation, which is good.
Sorry.
I've got a question around e-bikes, and how do you think, what kind of role do you think they're going to play in terms of widening your demographic of users for biking?
So e-bikes are widening that demographic already, so and they'll continue to grow. So I think the important thing is that we have to learn how to cater for them. So there's a lot of difference in opinions at the moment of what tracks they should be allowed on, which they shouldn't, but they are becoming more and more mainstream. So the club's, I guess, working on our own philosophy about how we should encourage and cater for e-bikes, and I think the council is obviously going to have to do the same. They're here, and I guess my personal belief is that they're here to stay, and there'll be more and more of them.
And you see that as a good thing?
I think anything that encourages people into the outdoors is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, physical activity is good for your heart and good for your mind. And
Thank you.
So one more question through the chair.
Just keep,
Just
for
really
future commentators too, just keep them to the questions on the topic Mr. Goldschmidt has brought up. Carry on.
Well, he did mention e-bikes. I've got one more question through the chair. Well, you know how we have this plan for a gondola? Will e-bikes sort of remove, will we still need a gondola if we have e-bikes increasing in use?
I guess I can't give a club position on that.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm here on behalf of the club, so I'll probably choose not to answer that question.
All right, cool.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed Councillor McGurk. So Councillor McGurk, Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Thanks, Ian. Really appreciate you coming in and support for the MOU. Question is, do you have any other similar arrangements with other landowners in the region as an MOU or some kind of arrangement?
So very good question. At the moment, we don't have an MOU, but our strategic plan over the next year has a target of 4 additional MOUs. So with landowners, with iwi, and other groups to bring us closer together, so we've got shared visions.
So this is the first one off
the first one off the rank.
Thanks, Ian. I have supported mountain biking in the past because one particular reason that really enthused me was the potential for the mountain biking, once it's established as it is now, to hold more competitions, races, international. And I've seen what they can do to a city up north in Rotorua and other places in Christchurch. I was told that we were going to be doing more of that sort of thing, but I don't see that in your strategic plan.
So our strategic plan does have a line item of having a world-class mountain bike event in Nelson within the next 5 years. And so we're linking with the Parks and Recs team at the moment and sort of looking at basing that out of one of the hubs that's proposed to be constructed in the Maitai. So it is definitely in our strategic plan and one of the activities that we're chasing.
Just to be clear, you've got one event coming up in the next 5 years.
So no, the Mountain Bike Club holds more than 60 events a year. But one of our, I guess, strategic goals within the next 5 years is to have a world-class international event in Nelson. So you will have heard about Crankworks in Rotorua that brought in more than $8 million. So we're looking at holding an event such as that. Part of that, we need an MOU with council so we can move forward and develop the facilities together to be able to support that. Those events don't happen overnight.
Great, that's the sort of thing I was hoping to see.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. That's very good. And I'm very impressed with the mountain bike group when you talk about volunteerism. Is that what the terminology you used, Mr. Courtney? Volunteerism. I think you're a great example of that. Thank you. For the Nelson region as a club, for other clubs to look up to. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
That ends our public forum. Moving on to confirmation of minutes, and that's on page 8 to 13. We now have the minutes for the 22nd of August, and just need to confirm them as correct. Does anyone have any corrections to those minutes?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, racking my brain trying to remember what your report was about, and the minutes don't really help me there. I'm not sure whether it was a written verbal report or an oral verbal report, but I really can't remember what it was, and I'm just making the point that the minutes, to be useful to me, will tell me what happened at the meeting, and this doesn't, so I'm wondering if we could have that corrected.
Call up my verbal, but I do have the notes on that, and I can get some input onto that. In the past, they have actually. In the past minutes I've seen, they have well summarised what I brought up, and maybe in regards to the use of a Trailgate Park, Trailgate Centre at the time. I think I believe it was about the netball. It was in regards to the netball event we'd had successfully there.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry? Oh, that's right. That's right. Thank you. Yeah, no, very much. So, any other corrections? Anyone want to discuss, debate the items in the minutes? No. Can I have someone move that the minutes are true and correct? Thank you, Councillor Rutledge, and seconded by Councillor Walker. I'll put the motion that we confirm those minutes.
Oh, just as long as they... I hope that we can get some
Commentary?
correction on what you said, yeah.
So through the chair, if there was a written report given by the chair, that would be incorporated in the minutes. If there's an oral report, then that generally isn't included. But the information is available on our YouTube site in terms of what was talked about.
It's a bit of a waste of words otherwise.
I'll see what I can do. It was fairly brief. I think it was a verbal. I recall it a verbal. But sorry, coming back to that, with those in favour, those against, carried. Let's move to the status report. The status report is on pages 14 and 15. It's just the one item we have there. No, we don't need a presenter on that. Does anyone have any questions in regards to the status reports, in regards to the draft marina strategy? Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we just have confirmation that we are on track to hit that, the date of coming back to this committee next meeting?
Yes, we are.
Good, thanks.
No other questions? Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question in relation to the brief of the Marina Advisory Group. Once they've done this review, are they going to we're going to have an ongoing role for the Marina Advisory Group? I can't recall the terms of reference. I just wonder if Mr. Ward could help with that, or somebody could help with that.
So we can cover that with the report that comes up in November.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, if we could do that, I'd really appreciate that. And one of the other aspects that I would be interested in is whether the ongoing financial implications and the positioning of the marina is obviously of some discussion as we go into the long-term plan, and I would have thought the Marina Advisory Group might actually be quite helpful in that regard as well.
You know, good point. My assumption that they would be, and I've found it extremely helpful, and I'd be looking for them to stay on. There's been no indication otherwise, but it would be good if we put that formally with both the council and the advisory group. But I think that's a necessity rather than a like. Thank you. Right. Can I have someone move that we receive a status report? Sorry, was it? Yep, and seconded by Councillor Walker. Quick to mark. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. So, on to the Chairman's report, and today once again it's a verbal commentary, or verbal, we'll call it a verbal commentary. There's also been a lot happening over the last few weeks and months, especially with the AMP coming up and the LTP, etc. And with and I've noticed obviously with the sporting events, you've got one lot of sports finishing and another lot starting, so it's been a great time, an opportunity for staff and the council committee just to take a broader look at our parks. They go from being slushy to vibrant growth. And I had a wander, for example, out to the archery just the other day. And as an example, one day it's all too mucky, grass is long, arrows getting lost. When the rain finally stopped, the staff were great, and they were able to, pretty much overnight, the archery club raised their hand and said, hey, we just got some issues here, but the staff were on to it, just waiting for the right weather, and they've turned that brilliant. They've even hard-packed a firm area where you drive in, and it's beautiful. I hadn't actually seen the archery from the archer's perspective, but I pulled a few arrows out of the quill and had a crack, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. They're really happy there. But that's the Masters, and that leads into the Masters Games, which has just started yesterday, and that's important. That's another thing I greatly champion, and Sports Tasman do a great job in looking after that, and you get, as you know, people come from around the country. And I thought I was going to probably miss being able to enter at least something in that, because I've got to disappear tonight down south for the boys' soccer, but I put in a late scratch for the cycling event. And down at the old side, we've got the new cycle velodrome just about to kick off, and that was, I thought I'll go and check that out because it's the last day that the old cycle track, some of you might remember it, the cycle track the wheelers used down at Trafalgar Park. I thought, I better go and have a look at that, and they even entered me as a late scratch wild card. So I turned up with my awesome fat bike. I think a few of the competitors said, are you allowed one of those on the track? I said, yep, we'll put a good advantage. And I had a race of 2K, what do you call it, the individual pursuit, and I managed to get second, get a silver medal for my age group. But Councillor Walker caught me out when I was gloating about that and said, how many were there entering? So I was last and second, but I'll take that. And I was the oldest in my group. I only got lapped once and a half. I thought the fat tyres, I could run him off the road, but he was gone. Put a chance to do that. But no, I'll take that. But I think I've broken a record. I don't think any other fat bike, when you see my tyres, any other fat bike has entered the Masters Games and scored a medal. So I'll claim that one. And receive was not a report to receive, but we'll receive that anyway.
I'd love to move that and congratulate you.
I'll bring the medal. I will wear the medal proudly next time I'm here. But no, they were very hospitable, and after they got over where I was allowed one of those on the track, they were cheering me on every lap, so I felt like a real champion. Those in favour? I'll second it. Councillor Barker seconded that. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Thank you. The draft annual plan of reserves, annual management plan. Just introduce this. We've got a couple of staff members I'm sure you've met. I'm not sure if you've all met Rosie, I'm probably have by now. Rosie's been a great addition to the team and been brilliant actually the go-to person, or one of the many go-to people for me. Thank you. I'll let Chris Ward take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say just a few words of introduction to this one. councillors will be aware that all our activity and asset management plans are coming through as drafts over the last month and next wee while. This one is in slightly different status than some of the others you will have seen through some of the other committees, because we have been doing a piece of work with sports codes to try and identify their aspirations and the facilities they would like to see in the long-term plan as we've gone along. So in previous long-term planning processes, we put the draft long-term plan out and we get submissions from sports codes, and that makes it very challenging for council to try and make decisions at a very late stage in the process. Staff have been working with sports codes over the last year to work with them to try and identify, before we get to the draft long-term plan stage, their aspirations to help council make some decisions ahead of time. So there is a committee workshop on the 18th of October to discuss those and to consider some of those sports codes requests, and so those haven't been included in the asset management plan at this stage. There's also a separate process underway for Natureland, and the committee will receive a separate report on that at its next meeting. But I'll hand over to Paul and to Rosie to talk through the detail of the plan itself.
Thank you, Paul and Rosie.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mr. Chair, councillors, youth councillors. That was a big part of what I was going to say, so I won't repeat that. This is a draft asset management plan, just to reiterate that. It will inform the long-term plan, but at the end of the day, the long-term plan makes the decisions, and this actually gets retrofitted after that in July next year. So when this is finally adopted, it will be after those long-term plan decisions. One of the key things we've identified is that we do have a lack of a strategic framework for parks and reserves, so we've included some funding in this asset management plan to carry out that work over the coming years. And that'll help guide priorities and investment and to determine the right level of funding between the council and the community. In terms of structure, there's a few changes in this asset management plan compared to the last one. Saxton buildings are now included in this one, so that all of Saxton is in this one, the Saxton Field, including the Oval, the Pavilion and the other buildings. Cemeteries and campgrounds are now in the property and facilities one. However, I've included cemeteries in this one because it didn't come before the committee when the property and facilities one did, because it was still part of this one. So by and large, it was what you'd call a business as usual. There's nothing really outlandish. I've been through the last asset management plan and looked at the capital, and it's actually a little bit less this time round for the capital, and that's probably a good thing given that the work is underway and there may be some more things coming in as we update it over the coming months. We've carried out a review of levels of service, which we brought through the workshops. Really, there's no change in level of service going higher or lower. It's more just we've tried to bring them into line with best practice, the New Zealand Recreation Association guidelines, make them more measurable, and also try and align it with the development contributions policy, which is another piece of work that's happening. That policy is quite dependent on levels of service for setting levies for the development contributions. So that's why you see some things in there around walking distances and hectares and that sort of thing. The other thing we've done is that through the workshops we discussed play equipment, so there's a bit of a change in the way we might renew some of our play equipment moving forward. We have in the past just renewed like for like, and we're looking at, well, if it's all traditional equipment we might put some natural stuff in there, so that might be a bit of a, what we've done with the renewals is we've pitched it about 20% less than what the actual cost would be to renew like for like, so it is a bit less for those renewals given that we're going to be putting some natural stuff in. And we've got a bit of a higher emphasis on weed control, particularly in landscape reserves, but also in conservation reserves. So there's a lot of work happening with weed mapping and just trying to make a really good plan for attacking that issue. The only other thing I was finally going to raise, and it's one issue that's it's one project that is really at the committee's and council's discretion, that's the Rutherford Park play space. We met with the chair and deputy a few weeks back, and there was some nervousness discussed and raised around that, and I appreciate that, I accept that, and the real nervousness was, without that high level strategic framework, how do we go and launch into putting money into that? So I just thought I'd take 30 seconds just to explain how we got to where we are today. But at the end of the day, it is a committee decision what we do there. And again, you're going to get another go at it when the long-term plan comes up, because that'll come back as a draft long-term plan. Committee will their say, and then there's a decision made. So back in 2009, the Harder-Nelson strategy identified there's a real lack of play equipment in the CBD, and identified a few areas where it could go. Rutherford Park was an obvious one. The Reserve Management Plan, which was around 2010, doesn't specifically mention a playground in Rutherford Park, but it does direct staff to do a development plan. So that development plan's been done, and there's a play space included in it. So it's been funded since 2012 in long-term plans at about 600,000. I think there's 50 for design and 550 for the development of it. And that was always going to be around 15-16, year 15-16, but it's been deferred, and that's where we are today. So it's not in a complete vacuum of policy or strategy. It could happen. It's really up to the committee. What would be really useful for us is just where on the spectrum do you see it? Nothing. Could be some natural stuff in there. It could be a theme, a science Rutherford theme. I had a good idea as I was biking into work yesterday, actually. If you're having logs and rocks and boulders, you could have split atom rock. I just had to get that out there. You could have a standard playground, 500k, or you could have Dreamworld. I mean, we just wanted to know where do you want to pitch it for this asset management plan, and then it will go into the long-term plan and that, and then be submitted on. So keen to have any feedback, questions on any aspect. Rosie, have you got anything? If I missed anything?
No, that sounds good.
Cool.
Just questions.
Councillor Courtney, Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Officer Paul and Rosie. I really enjoyed the report. It was so interesting. A lot of extra facts you've peppered through there. I mean, I didn't realise that Nelson had 5% Asian population and intended to increase by 2032, I think you had in there, to 15,000, and the Maori population at 10,000. All very interesting. Paul, on page 7, 9, big 9 in our papers here today, under 3 I's, key issues, you have about four rows down there. You've had investment projects you're talking about there, and is expected to experience changing demand drivers over the medium to long term. Significant investment projects is expected to experience changing demand drivers over the medium to long term. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, which page number were we again?
I'm on key issues,
Yep.
triple I, small I, page 7 in your report.
Yep.
Just a few lines down on that key issues heading there, where you say, expected to experience changing demand drivers over the medium to long term. I really would like you to have expanded on that a bit. Is that to do with our changing demographic, or
Yeah, chiefly it's to do with changing demographics, ageing population,
Yes.
and the difference in cultural proportions that we're seeing. But one of the key ones is our ageing population.
Yes.
On one side you've got a lot of requests from sporting codes and from other groups to build new infrastructure, and on the other side you've got an ageing population, perhaps less of a rating base, income base for rates, and less participation in those organised sports, according to the Sport New Zealand statistics. Although some of our officers note that we're not really seeing that in schools. There's still really good participation in those traditional codes, but that's the trends we're looking at.
There's just so much in here you could ask questions about. I mean, there was one in there too on the heritage for iwi, and I thought, well, we don't do enough there, and we should do more in the city for that. So I'd sort of wanted to know what your ideas were in that regard to iwi heritage is recognised in parks and reserves, and that was on page 16 of your report. So could you expand on that for me, please?
I couldn't agree more. I think we have an awful lot of European history in our artwork around the town, and I'd love to see more. And that's one of the things we've done, is just as a wee level of service in there around every time a reserve is named, or every time a sign goes up, to make sure we have the iwi name recognised and have the translation. Yeah, that's my view on that, and I'm sure that's other officers share that as well. It also goes towards traditional harvesting of plants and so forth in the headwaters of creeks and rivers.
Well, I have many, but I'll leave it at that.
And sort of a follow-up, Councillor Corner, with regards to that change of expected uses and demographics, and that's been a bit of a horse for the carts. So we're still waiting a bit of feedback from various sports codes, and Councillor Rutledge has been doing a little bit with Sports Tasman and the demographics and the changing of keep an eye on that, the changing of usage coming up. So you get more use for like weekday after work, less formal than the Saturday, Sunday. So it's been a bit of a shift there in trying to make sure with the asset management plan that we're getting the right, thinking ahead, getting the right usage and investment and grades of maintenance, etc. on those. So while us trying to form this AMP and then trying to form this strategy, we're still in that process getting some feedback. We've got a quick workshop of contact with someone on the sports codes, get some feedback and contacting those groups that we hadn't heard from in the areas we wanted to hear from before we line those up. So the team have done a good work to really just to try to make sure we can shoehorn, I think you put it, for when we really get that strategy and goal in place. And it's something we're sort of writing up, but once we get a full picture of these changing, there's been a real change in the way sports are using, and Sports Tasman have been good at feeding out, especially for the Nelson statistics. But thank you on that. Councillor Fulton, Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I've got a couple of questions around the natural playground ideas, and you mentioned that the cost, you've reduced your cost by 20%, because is that because that's the cost reduction if you use all natural, or is that if you're using a mixture of natural and replacing with
it's a real mix. Like the 100% cost would be replacing like for like. So a Roctopus is 20 grand or so. You know, you go in there and smash it out with another Roctopus. But you know, if you've got 3 other really traditional bits of equipment, then you might look at that as a whole landscape and put something different in there that only costs $3,000 or $4,000. So, but in another area, you might just do a like for like because it works. So it's just an assessment each time.
Okay. And a second question through the chair. So in terms of the Rutherford Park playground, if we were looking at a natural only space initially, what would that 500,000 be adequate, or would it be significantly less?
Yeah, no, that would be more than enough. The hockey reserve was around 400,000, and that's got a flying fox and a whole lot of stuff. So for 100,000 or 150,000, you've still got to prepare the area, you know, get the bark and prepare the base of it. But you'd get a very good, I think you'd get quite a good natural-based play area with landscaping for 150. You know, Rosie, you might be able to advise on that as well. You've got a lot more experience in building playgrounds, but that would be my opinion. And the benefit of that as well is you can move the stuff away, and it doesn't get, you can recycle it somewhere else if you want to develop it later. So that would be a short-term option, and it could be a long-term option.
So the reason why I'm asking is I lived in Melbourne for 6 years, and my children were quite little then, and so the Botanical Gardens has an amazing children's garden within it, which is all natural. And I guess I see that the Maitai has quite a natural feel already, and to complement the existing plantings in the walkway, looking at a natural playground, if it's significantly less budget as well, could be a good way forward. How much work would be involved for staff to draw up something natural looking so we could have a look at that?
Yeah, so there's a business case sort of beavering away in the background now, because this is still a project that's in our long-term plan.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, there's different options. So it wouldn't take a lot. So we could bring concepts back and yeah.
So just to clarify, are you seeking our guidance on that as a committee today?
Yeah, it would be useful to have some guidance as to what to include in this, because we're not going to come back really to you with the asset management plan until the next time you'll see it is in the draft long-term plan, which you'll have workshops for. It would just be good to have a guidance.
We've got a workshop on the 18th of October
to work that out.
I think that'd be a good time
to look at that as well. So possibly we could look at some plans there. I mean, personally, I'm quite keen to look at that and to pursue that option. I think that if it costs less and it's in keeping with the existing walkway, then that could be a really. I think that the CBD desperately needs a playground, but we do have quite a, we have Tahuna Beach, which is quite, I mean, it's becoming more and more natural as we refit it, but it is quite traditional already, so it would be nice to look at something different.
If the workshop in a couple of weeks is the best time to discuss it, then let's do that. It doesn't have to be today.
That'd be great there. Councillor Barker. And then Councillor Laurie.
Yeah, thanks. Yep. There's a lot of great reading in this, and I took quite a lot of time reading it. Consequently, I've got about 30 different things that I would if I had the time, I'd like to raise and talk about. But it would take too long today, so a workshop might be better for that. But there are 3 or 4 that I'll just cover. I get an impression as I read through the plans that we're very defined in how we're describing and managing and planning our areas, and in particular the public gardens, the neighbourhood parks, the play facilities, very defined and compartmentalised, and not looking at the possibility of multi-use. I can see playgrounds being in public gardens, and I can see very popular use of Isle Park, and it's acknowledged as very popular for disc golf. But disappointed to see that the message coming through was that it's not compatible. Well, I disagree with that. I think that the people who play disc golf there are very, very conscious of the park and the things in it, and appreciate it and protect it. So I'd like to see playgrounds incorporated into other places than just where they are. And yes, I do think that use of natural things to put into playgrounds is good. But during the workshops, I think 3 or 4 times I mentioned what I've seen in other playgrounds, particularly the Lower Hutt one and the Christchurch ones, which are very educational in the way they're constructed for kids. And the turnout of families and people, I gave the example on a wet, cold, southerly driving, sleety rain in Lower Hutt. The place was full of families because they were just the kids were having so much fun. And I want to see that sort of car park, that sort of a playground brought into our situation. So can you guys take on board that? I'll raise it later. The other thing, the next question is, can you do anything about pages 175 and 189? I can't read them. Just impossible to read. And all right, my final question: is there any more detail on some of the very hard to read stats on participation, recreational participation? Nothing much there in recreational gardening. Is it correct that the cricket is such low participation as was shown in your bar chart for cricket? And if that's the case, the money we put into it is not comparative to the participants' usage.
Yeah, it is. That's just the Sport New Zealand participation rates, but and it's a comparison against the rest of New Zealand, so it may well be still reasonably okay. It's just a comparison again. The main key message out of those charts, I think, really is the independent, non-traditional sports do quite well in Nelson. So yeah, it's Sport New Zealand data.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's all my questions. I won't have much else to say other than that either, because we're going to have the workshops so we can get into these things in more detail. So.
Correct. Councillor Laurie.
Thanks, Chairman, and I'm not a member of this committee, so I do appreciate the opportunity to ask questions and things. Through the Chair, I think the Rutherford playground is absolutely vital, just an absolute must-do thing for the city. At the moment, that area is a large empty space that we spend a lot of money on, and it's a little bit agoraphobic even. And what it needs is people and activity. And when I look at it, I think about what happens on the Wellington waterfront with Frank Kitts Park and Waitangi Park, which are just packed with families and kids all the time, because there's a magnet, there's something to draw them into the area, and that's what this space needs as well. So I'm curious as to whether, when we look at how much emphasis we should put on that project, how much do we take into account the growing numbers of people who are going to be living in that area? Because we've signed off on some special housing area projects that are in the wood and not very far actually along, just adjacent to the Mai Tai. There's more intensive housing coming to the central part of the city. Presumably there'll be some kids, families with those houses. And also, what about the potential of that park to attract visitors?
Just keep in mind that with the Rutherford, we will be doing a workshop on the 18th, so we'll be able to really thrash that out. So if we're just trying to
I'm just asking whether these questions are explored, because
they are explored through the business case process. Like, that'll absolutely look at who's living around, other play facilities, and it also looks back to the Heart of Nelson strategy, which had quite a lot of information in there about the benefits of this play space and who else it brings in, like the families and the retail that happens and the pop-up things. So it'll all be explored in the business case.
Yeah, I see it having real advantages for the CBD in terms of getting people to spend an extra hour or two here in the area. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. Oh, sorry, I've missed Mayor Rees and then Councillor Rutledge.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul and Rosie, look, thank you for the explanation about what isn't in here yet. So obviously this has got quite a way to go until, because it's basically, you've said it's a business as usual, level of services are pretty much the same. We've got a workshop to come, so we've got quite a few more projects that we need to look through. So today is not the day for that, so we need to focus on what's here. But what I'm interested in is what is different in here, so to what was in the long-term plan? What's already in here that I wouldn't have seen in the long-term plan? You've given me some bullet points at the start in your report of what you've looked at, but I just want to know, because there's one I'd particularly point out, and it may have already been in the long-term plan, and we discussed it at Public Forum this morning, was the Maitai Hub. Was that in the previous one?
No. So I've went through and made a little list.
Oh,
if you want
brilliant.
me to rattle through them.
Yes, I was hoping you'd have done that at the start, so I didn't have to ask my question actually, Paul.
Well, there's a bigger list of the stuff that's still in. I won't go through that, but there is Miazu Pond Renewal, Stoke Youth Park, there's a whole lot. The new ones that have come in, so there's a walkway to connect Green Meadows to Isle Park and Portman Stream. There's an investigation into roading hydro. That's because there's a house there that essentially has one power line going all the way from Richmond to it, and so there's just an investigation into that. There's the hubs, so there's Maitai Hub and there's the Brook Hub, which is the priority, and that comes out of the off-road trails strategy. The Brook was the #1 priority. The Maitai is the bigger one, but it's a lower priority, but we're still working on that. The Marsden Hub is also in there, but it's quite a long way out because that wasn't prioritised. There's some work at Eureka Sister City Park to do some trails, investigation into Dog Exercise Park, investigation into Tahuna Boardwalk, getting from the camp across to the back beach area, and that's trying to tie in with the Great Taste Trail as well. There's the Great Taste Trail funding. That's not actually a project we're leading, but we're providing money for it. And there's a whole lot of stuff in Saxton, which I didn't list, but that's come through the Saxton Field Committee working with TDC. So those are the ones I picked out that were not in the long-term plan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if it's business as usual, Paul, what did you take out? So that's all the ones you've put in. So what did you take out?
Well, there's a whole lot of projects that have been done, and some that have come out that are there's a drainage project at Saxton that didn't make it. We're not sure about what's happening with the Modeller's Pond. We're not sure what's happening with other play space. But there's 3 years that have happened of work that's been done. This is kind of the next 3 years as well.
I understand that, Mr. Chair, but in a long-term plan we're now into that next 3 years, and so there would have been a plan for this 3 years. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what's gone in. So from what I'm hearing, Paul, we've got quite a list of things that have still gone on. And have you done a bit of a work out in terms of those capital budgets at the moment? So what was in the previous long-term plan for this 3 years and what you've got now?
Yep, I went through the lines on the capital budgets.
Brilliant.
And it's pretty similar. In fact, some of them were less. Some of the OPEX was a little bit more, and that's mainly around weed control.
Just a couple of other quick questions. I'm looking forward to us working through this in the workshop because I actually think we still need to do quite a bit on this and understand why we're approaching it that way and support that. Just in terms of the document we've got today, you've highlighted the cemeteries issue that you're going to do a trial there on maintenance around that. So is that just a one-off that's in this financial year as opposed to something that's been carried through into the plan?
Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at that, but I'm pretty sure we just included the extra budget for the years to come. That's what I think it was, but it was only the tune of $10,000 or $20,000 a year, so it wasn't.
Right, thank you. Right, well, I'll have a look for that when we get down to the dollars, more of the dollars. And then the other part that I'm just interested in is at the start of your plan, you talk about the standard, essentially a rating, asset rating, and you talk about 1 to 5 and council's optimum level being the midpoint of 3. And I just want to test that out a bit more because I would have thought that some of the assets that we have, we'd actually want them to be sitting up at 5 because they're of a standard, they're an international standard. So is that sort of an average of what you're saying? That's on page 13 of
Yeah, I was just looking for the Saxton Buildings chapter because there's a little spiel at the start, which unfortunately I didn't write. Jock wrote that part. But my understanding is that the most efficient way for council to maintain those buildings is at a level 3, but I agree, the ones like the Saxton Oval are maintained at a higher spec. And that's, so there's possibly some that are a little bit lower as well, but I don't exactly know the answer to that one, I'm sorry.
If you might be elaborate, with the previous meeting that was, similar question was asked, and is that correct when you got the grading? Because for some of us trying to get an understanding how that grading works, it was fitting with the purpose of that asset. So some might be a 3 for a Neil Park, for example, but a 3 for the Trafalgar Park. Was that right? But it's trying to keep it, maintain it. That is what it's designed for, though they both have different design criteria. Is that correct? What I picked up from a previous meeting? Because that was a similar question. Why are you doing a 3 for this lower item, you get a 3 for this higher item, but they're still a higher service?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other thing, just for Rosie and for Paul. On page 106 at the top of that page, you've got some percentages and targets that you reference from the out and about policy. Those targets actually aren't in the out and about policy. They're in the regional transport plan and the transport asset management plan, and you probably want to go back and reconcile those with what's now in the draft transport asset management plan because they've changed.
So was that just big number 106, or was that?
It's big number 106.
Okay.
So those numbers are now different. So you just need to make sure you've got using the same numbers. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Cheers, Madam Mayor. Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So the natural features. When you're talking about 20% reduction in costs, are you talking about just the capital cost of installing them, or are you talking about whole of life cost?
That's just the renewal cost. So it's the capital renewal cost, which is generally, yeah.
Okay, so is there an expectation that they will last as long as we get out of steel and...
No, they don't last as long, but they're significantly cheaper. So even though the life cycle might be 6 or 7 years, it's still a lot cheaper in the whole of life.
Okay, so you're confident that natural play features will reduce the total cost of playgrounds over the lifespan?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. You talked about the mountain bike hub and the priorities you're putting on them. The Brook Hub is funded this year to be done this year, isn't it? So isn't the Mai Tai now the highest priority for this plan?
Yes, yeah, you're right. So it's kind of drafted with a view to the future, but there are some things in here which may be done this year and they'll come out. So you are right, there's a few things in there. I had a proofread a few days ago and I didn't manage to before it went on the agenda, and I've noticed a few things like that and a few typos. So anyone with an eagle eye, just be assured that I'll catch them. I was pretty crook when it went on the agenda, so I didn't get to do it. But yeah, there are a few things like that that'll come out.
Okay, cool. With respect to the Mai Tai hub and how people are going to access it, we have the P60 track up Brantford North side, which I'm assuming is going to connect into that hub and be a key route for getting there. Is that right?
I don't think it is related to accessing the Mai Tai hub. I think that's, if anything, it would be related to accessing the hill below the central New Zealand. It's right at the back of Brantford, and it's only a few hundred metres long, and it's probably 4Ks or 5Ks away from the Mai Tai hub. So I don't think anyone would hop across onto that to access that.
Okay. So, right, in that case, to change the question, but given the out and about track strategy, and we closed off an area for off-road access for bikers, are you confident in safe and I guess off-road access up into that Mai Tai hub? Do we need to do anything more in this plan for that?
Yeah, because yes, I think there's a fairly good trail all the way up. It's something that will be looked at through the business case process, which is underway now. But it's a good point. It's a good question. But yeah.
And also, if I could, one more. We talk about where are we? Conservation reserves. The summary on page 37. we've got a performance measure of prevalence of key species, and it says updated with species and targets following present weed surveys. Are we only looking at weeds in there as a performance measure, or are we talking about other species? What are we meaning there?
Really, I think we're talking about weeds, but it could include animals as well, if that's what you're meaning. You mean plant and animal species?
Well, it says reserves are managed to protect biodiversity values. I guess if I was looking at a performance measure of key species in those reserves, I'd be pretty keen to see something, and this is not the first time you're hearing this from me, about some positive things like, is it kiddidu count, or something that indicates the health, biodiversity health of an ecosystem beyond just a weed measure.
Sorry, yeah, that is exactly why that's highlighted. We're basically working with Nelson Nature and working with the operations team to develop not only weed maps and operational plans, but also to identify what species would be really good to have in that level of service. So it could well be kiriru or something like that.
Sorry, if I may, final thing. There's mention in the plan about ageing demographics, and it's been discussed a little bit. To my way of reading this, at the moment in our thinking, we are identifying it as a challenge, but we don't yet have a plan to do anything about it. Would that be fair at this stage, and that's this thinking that really needs to get on and get done over the next year or so?
Through you, I think we are pretty well on to, we're quite mindful of that. As we renew things or develop playgrounds, we're looking at shade, we're looking at the quality of access pathways, seating, toilets, location of toilets, and also we're looking to, potentially, well, no, I think you're right, that strategy will look at it, but I think we're already very mindful of it, so that would be the easiest answer. And we're already, as we renew things and as we develop things, nice wide paths and getting lots of shade and seating in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Courtney McGurk.
If I can just pop this one in, I really would like to have an answer to be reassured. On page large 19, you talk about international tourism growing at 16% and domestic at 20%. Ensure adequate supply of facilities, such as toilets, and what sprung to mind, and I want to know whether we have applied or we're going to apply for the central government's funding of 150 million that they made available for that type of infrastructure. Have we availed ourselves of that, or are we going to? Do you know?
Yep, we put an application in through the chair. Sorry, we put an application in to MB for an upgraded facility for the Brook Hub. So that's match funding. So we have a budget of 135, and we applied for 135, and that was specifically for a better amenity block, better quality amenities. So we should hear back from that in November.
Good question. Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm really interested in this, your comments, I think, scattered through the report, I think pages on 1752, 117, about organised sports and the decline in numbers of organised sporting activity in clubs and so forth, and the increase in informal. I was looking for a bit more discussion about how we might, how you recognise that and how we might, the expectations, and I'm wondering if that's going to come up in the workshop when we talk about sports codes.
Yeah, I think that'll be key. Yeah, I think it's best probably discussed in that workshop. At this point, because another thing we can discuss in that workshop is the amount of funding that goes to mountain biking and those informal sports. So it's just one bit of the asset management plan that we're waiting for input on.
That's, I think, is at the workshop on the 18th.
Thank you. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to whip this over here.
After that. Sorry.
It's going, isn't it? They usually die on me.
Thank you for letting me ask my questions. I've come partly because we've got cemeteries, which sits under my chair, and it's in here, but I presume it's going to actually come out of here and go in, yeah, it's going to go into another one. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions on that, if I may, and then I've got a couple of oddball questions. I'm looking at, and the Mayor raised this, but the trimming of the plots. And I do see the word trial, and I'm a bit concerned about that because I actually thought that we should be doing it 3 times a year, and now we're doing it once anyway, so I don't want to think it's a trial. And I'm quite happy to take somebody up there and show you what it looks like because it's really hard to trim those plots as an individual, and I think people, as they're going to age, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that.
Through you, the Chair, my recollection from when Jock presented his asset management plan, we had this discussion at that stage. The word trial is that we wanted to bring back to this committee for that discussion. So it is certainly the intention to be long term, rather that we'd report back after the first one and see how that went. There might be some other options available. So in terms of trial, maybe it's reporting back.
Okay, and I think through the Chair it needs to come to the Community Services Committee. Thank you. The other question I've got is on page 161, large 161, and it talks about the new capital investment needing to be done. And we haven't got any figures on that because they're to come later. But it says that there's significant capital investment that's going to be required at Marsden Valley Cemetery to prepare for the next areas. Have you got any, is that in the are those figures in the long-term plan already?
No, I think they're in this asset management plan. I'll just find it for you. It's a lot of underground works, which is the main cost, drainage and so forth.
Is that in the land that's, through the Chair, is that in the land that's already allocated and it's just grassed at the moment?
Yes, that's right.
Through the Chair, actually I'm not worried as long as it's there.
I don't know if the cemetery's budget, it is there, it's about 800,000.
Okay, thank you. I just want to know that it is there to get a sense of that.
And the design work is already completed for it.
Thank you. Okay, and just, I have got a couple of minor things that I may raise with the staff later, and they can have my marked up copy if they want to have that.
I'll wrap up.
I've got one more question, just a comment really regarding the play areas, and it was raised in the former term of council, I think before both of you were here, and it was a comment regarding intergenerational play, and it may be something that you might have missed, but I think we need to remember that we've got a lot of grandparents looking after grandchildren, and grandparents aren't as old as grandparents used to be. There's a lot of young grandparents out there who are very active. So when you're talking about shade areas and seating, I'm thinking, no way, I'm getting on that swing. So I think you need to think about, I think you need to look at the grandparents of today because actually they're a lot younger than what my grandparents were. So it's just a different view of looking at it, and we're more interactive with, I haven't got any yet, so I can't really gloat, but if I had any, I'd be playing with them.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor. I think that's wrapped that up. I'd like to, would someone care to combine the receiving report and recommendation to the table? Can someone, Councillor Walker, Councillor Fulton? Any debate? Any debate on the motion? Councillor Barker.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, not really. I'm pretty happy to support this. I will say that prior to the meeting I asked from my governance committee perspective for the finance people to give me figures which would show me, particularly for the financials on pages 42 on, what the current year 2017-18 figures are. So I'd like to be able to compare what we have currently to what the forecasts are out to the future. It's more meaningful for me to do that. And just one other point, if this can be feedback on the future demand, there's no mention when I read through the whole thing about recreational gardening. Yep. Recreational gardening is something which is declining around the country because of intensification of housing, and recreational gardening is a very important thing in my view, particularly for families and young people, but also for those who want to make their living more affordable. And so I'd like to see recreational gardening included into this. It's my sustainable message.
I'd agree, so we can pull it up at the workshop and give it some good air time. So, so Madam Mayor, were you wanting to speak to that? Yep. So
just briefly, I'm happy to support this.
Sorry, I got Madam Mayor and then Kate Forden.
I'm happy to support this. What will be very helpful from my perspective, and I suspect for the rest of the committee's perspective, is because we're going to take this into the long-term plan and it's going to have to go in with a bid with a whole lot of other things, is if we could have the financials, essentially what I used to call the estimates, you know, what used to be the estimates book, if within that you can highlight things that are new, or things that are changed essentially, so changes from what was in the previous LTP, so we know if there's been a reduction in the amount of money which reflects a level of service issue or new projects or other things, it just makes it a whole lot easier to collate it. And if that list that Mr Harrington read out before, if that, I think it would be worth just when we get to our workshop making sure that we've got that and circulated. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just had a couple of comments which I'll make having heard other councillors' questions. I think Councillor Rutledge's point about the Maitai shared pathway is an important one, and with the Maitai hub being proposed up there, we can anticipate an increased number of mountain bikers utilising the space, and I think that the shared pathway up to Sunday Hole needs to be looked at carefully in terms of how we ensure that walkers have a place as well. On that note, I just, we had submissions quite a few years ago about the importance of walkers having hard but unsealed surfaces. It's not sealed, concreted, and my concern is that we move into the future in our urban environments, more and more surfaces end up sealed, whereas it's very important that walkers are walking on unsealed, slightly uneven surfacing, especially as we're ageing. I completely concur with Councillor Noonan's point about intergenerational play, and I think that looking to the future with, if we can create natural play spaces for a whole lot less money, but ensure that they are intergenerational as well, particularly with the Rutherford Park play area, then that's really important. And I concur with Councillor Barker's comments on recreational gardening. I think that there is a role for more garden spaces within our parks and reserves, and I know that we've got a whole lot better at putting fruit trees and planting in a way which is in keeping with that, but I do think that the potential for some recreational garden spaces in our parks and reserves creates a place for people to come to and spend time. A little bit like that. In England they have the, what are they called? The commons or the allotments, you know, but we don't necessarily need an allotment. People should be able to just come and use their community garden. I think that's happening a little bit in Tahuna at the moment, which is great.
Councillor Forden and Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Again, I'm going to speak in support of this plan. I think it's really great the way that staff have worked to try and identify some of the projects and the community needs and taking a real needs-based analysis view going forward. And while that work is not yet fully ensconced in this plan, certainly I have a level of confidence that post the workshop we'll be in a really good space. So the draft long-term plan is a really full document coming up from Sport and Rec Committee. So my understanding is that that'll put this document quite a lot further advanced than has been previously the case. So that's exciting. I have some real caution around the Rutherford Park play space, particularly given the different iterations that are being kicked around and how varied they are. The Heart of Nelson strategy identified the need to be a real destination playground, and the purpose was to give people a reason to spend another half day and attract them. Now the multi-million-dollar price tag for that, I think, worried quite a lot of people, and so that got put on ice. Now, if we are going to put a play space of some description in there, I think it really does need to be needs-based or have a real strategic purpose, as opposed to being based on what any one of us think might be nice. Because otherwise we run the risk of just kicking this down the road a bit longer or not spending money in an intelligent, purposeful way. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. I'll put that the motion that we recommend the approval of a draft Parks and Asset Management Plan 2018 to 2028. All those in favour? All those against? Carried. We'll just adjourn for a quick tea break. I'm also very conscious we've got a couple of councillors, and we've got Alec Vertis here at the moment, and we've got a couple of councillors needing to leave a bit later on. So we'll have a very quick tea break, so don't disappear completely, and we'll straight into it. 49 onwards, which is the Tahuna Pond update and way forward. I'll ask, but welcome Alec Levertis. I'm sure he's had a busy day. And Shane Davies. And Chris, would you want anything to that? So Shane and Alec, you just when you're good. I think everyone's just getting their papers ready. And
thank you.
go for
Through
gold.
the chair, I can confirm that there's no amendments and no updates to the report. I will take the report as read, but very, very briefly, a summary. Council previously resolved to approve the preferred option to modify the pond with the concrete base and all the associated works. A working group was set up comprising 2 councillors, the Modeller Society officers, as well as a representative from the Tahuna Nui Business Association. That group has met several times. The design has been finalised, the resource consent secured, and detailed cost estimates have come in. That cost estimate is higher than the budget, and hence today we are sitting in front with this report in front of you. So other than that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions on a report? I'll take it as read, and this is something which is sorry. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I know this sounds like a strange question, but please humour me. Will putting the pond, the modification of the pond on hold, somehow lead to the price tag going down? Or would the price tag, if it gets put on hold, go up?
So through the chair, if you're going for the existing solution, it is dependent on the market. At the moment, the market is very buoyant. We are in a buyer's market from a contractor's point of view. If we had to tender at a later stage, that market could well be in the other favour, so it could be less. At this moment in time, there's a glut of work on the market. It's really hard to say. We're in a difficult stage market at the moment, but that's not to say that it couldn't be the same, a little bit more depending on when we tender, or perhaps a little bit less. It really depends on the market.
Okay, through the chair. So it could be more, could be less. Could be less. Yeah, I've got that. So, well, just 1.7. The thing is,
Through the chair, I wasn't being flippant in my answer.
Oh, I got it.
It's dependent on the market.
Maybe it's in the confusion. A hold is probably not the word. It's a pause. It's a pause, and we've got the project that's moving a forward project, and I am concerned that public and some councillors have plugged that this is some sort of now putting a hold, hoping to go away, kicking the can down the road. This is not. This is being a very prudent decision to move this forward. I won't speak on behalf.
So, through the chair, my next question relates to, in the report it says that the Modellers Society, I think, has raised $15,000, and it says in the report that they want to spend that money on a event that's going to be held early next year, I think. I'm just wondering, like, if I was someone who donated money to save the Modellers Pond, I would have donated that money to actually trying to do something to, modify the pond. I wouldn't have donated that money to a regatta, to an event. I'm just wondering if that question's been asked.
Through the chair, that is a question for the Modeller Society, not us. How they solicited or accessed that money and to what extent it was going to be used for is really up to them. All I was making the point in the report is that they have done some fundraising. It's in the order of 15,000, and that they will be putting that towards their convention. So it's not a question I've asked them. It's
I'd remind council here that organisation, that's their
Yeah,
of the business.
It's in the report.
We as council running this project, they'd kindly offered to try and get some leverage from them as a community group. What they decide to do and what this project decides to do, that's up to us. We're obviously using them as a partner.
Sure. And my last question, if it's okay through the chair, is so the recommendation is to do a business study on the estuarine environment option, or the estuary wetland option. Could you remind us, Mr. Levertis, why didn't we already do that? Why don't we already have that information, given that that was put up as the alternative in the last term of council for the area should the modellers not be able to raise sufficient funds?
So through the Chair, and this was covered in the previous report, when the cost estimate was undertaken for the return to estuarine, it had an accuracy of plus minus 30%. At that stage, we weren't, what we don't do is prepare detailed designs for a whole range of options. We do estimates, and at that stage, Council then adopted that the preferred option was the modify. So we put our efforts into finalising the cost of the modify option. What we're actually saying in this report is because that is substantially higher than the budget, we need to take a stop and reassess what the actual costs of potentially returning it to estuarine would look like. But at that stage, the early stages, it was a preliminary estimate. We certainly didn't undertake detailed estimates because we wouldn't have expended the time and effort in doing detailed estimates on a whole range of options.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for letting me do this. So my last question is, the working group wants to continue with pursuing the modify option. Staff, the report keeps the modify option alive by putting it on hold. Is actually the recommendation of staff for us to pursue the modify option? I'm a bit unclear from the report what staff's recommendation is when it comes to whether or not we proceed with the 1.7 modify option.
So through the Chair, I'll just clarify. The working group was, I guess, an independent group put together, and officers who were supporting it. The views that I've given on page 54 of the working group are their views. And one of the things that we undertook was that we would give their views specifically in the report on the basis that that may not necessarily be where officers end up in their recommendations. So, yes, the working group was of the view that they did not favour returning to estuarine, that they decided that they thought putting it on hold and exploring the additional funding through some other mechanism. What we are saying in our recommendation, and I did think that that was pretty clear, and I apologise if it isn't, we're not saying that we should proceed with any particular option, including the modify option. What we're saying is that we need to just, if we're taking a breather, we need to look at all the other options to see whether they stack up in terms of finances across the board. So we're certainly not advocating that we're favouring any option for that matter. That's the whole point of a detailed business case, and I think there's a timely point for officers to actually say, well, let's just, if we're going to look at these options, there may be a number of options that we look at in terms of the detailed business case. So it may not just be the return to estuarine compared to the modify. It may be a whole range of options that we prepare.
I'd concur there. I was on that group, and Councillor Walker was the chair of that group, and he may better put it than me. But we were, as you'll recall, meetings gone back when we've thrashed it through, trying to get the most prudent option, best for money option. And the reason we went down that road, because that was pretty much an equal price to doing estuarine option, and that's possibly cheaper when we get the leverage out of the community group, and we're getting a duo purpose with that pond rather than just its core infrastructure usage. So we put our energies into keeping the tabs on that design option, and we've come to this point where we now need to take a brief pause and need to do a detailed report, a detailed business case to align ourselves up if we need to go down the estuarine option or not. But as Mr. Levertis has put quite clearly, though we may have had our goals, we've kept it very open, and we've thrashed them out to the nth degree, and we want to be very prudent in our decisions. So at this point, we are, as a report reflecting, I thought reflected pretty clearly that we're at that point of moving it quickly forward. But to do that, we need to make sure we've got our figures and detail correct to make sure whatever A or B we do is correct on that. But have I got any other speakers? Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Council approved the $1.2 million fix solution to proceed. Has the scope or the design changed at all that we now have this inflated figure in front of us?
So through the Chair, no, I don't think the design has been, the scope has changed. I think the design has been refined, and as a result of the consultant wanting a greater degree of certainty in terms of what that project would cost if we did go out to tender. sought an independent quantity surveyor, which is an accurate means of ascertaining what the market would place on a specific project. We typically don't do that on the run-of-the-mill contracts, such as roading and stormwater, but this is a particular contract and a solution. And as a result of that work, the cost estimate to undertake that work was deemed higher than the consultant actually had estimated. But I don't believe that it was as a result of scope creep. It was as a result of refining the detailed design, because at that stage we hadn't finalized the detailed design. It was only finalized once the working group had been set up. But no, I don't think it was scope creep. I think it was finalization of design and then a detailed estimate of what that work would undertake.
Okay, so given that we had an approval for a solution that at the time we were confident that it was going to be able to be delivered for the $1.2 million budget, why didn't we just put that out for tender and see what the market said about that? Wouldn't have that been a reasonable process? And you've said that's how you do other projects?
Through the Chair, I think that's a fair comment. But to put that into perspective, if we had known at the time that the design was being finalized, that it was still going to be 1.2, then that may have been the route that we would have followed, because then the estimate would have been very close to the budget and we would have tested the market. However, as a result of the detailed design, and we were firming up the cost estimate, that was substantially different. So the environment in terms that we were working on had changed. And I made it very clear to the working group that as a rule we tend to not to go to market where there is a big variance in terms of what the estimate is going to be to the actual budget, because that's unfair on contractors. There's, by virtue of the fact that you put out a tender, there is an intent to enter into a contract, and as a result of the budget exceeding the estimate, I was very clear in my advice to the working group that we wouldn't be doing that. If we had got to the stage in the detailed design was in the order of 1.2, we may well have tendered to test the market. But with the new information that we had on the table, and there was such a substantial difference, I could not, in all faith and as my professional, I could not recommend that we go to tender.
Okay, thank you. And then finally for me, the work that you are recommending we undertake around the return to estuary option, do you intend that includes quantity surveys estimates, so we have the same level of confidence in that solution as you now do in this one?
Through the Chair, I think it would be a safe assumption that we would be employing through our consultant, we may be independent, a quantity surveyor to have a look at what that work is, because it is specialist.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker, and then Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to hear that you're talking about other options, because as a layperson, I've long been worrying about another option. And we have this option, return to estuarine. I'm not sure that there ever was estuarine there. The water only gets into there from the very high tides twice a month, so it's not estuarine. And we've been told that to do anything we have to remove the sludge and material underneath. And we've been told that to do that was very costly. Well, as a layperson, I'm looking at the amount of earthworks that are taking place around the city and the machinery that's there, and they're moving twice that amount in the morning in some of these big projects. I still have in my mind one option is to remove the sludge and return it to grassland. So it's in my mind as the cheaper, unless there's any other magic wands that can come up, that seems to me the cheapest way.
So through the Chair, I think that's what the detailed business case will actually show us. And Councillor Barker is correct, there's a lot of earthworks happening around. I think this is slightly different though. This is a hail site, so we know that there's it's a designated hail site. How we treat that site will be dependent on the options that we look at. Returning to estuarine, there could be a number of options associated with that, and one of them may well be bringing in imported fill, but in terms of how we treat the hail, in terms of how we cap that, whether we remove it, what the disposal costs are, I think that work still needs to be undertaken, and I think the jury's still out there, but I agree with Councillor Barker. The option that he has proposed may well be an option that we will be exploring, absolutely.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Alec, I think it would be helpful for this committee, and in fact more than just the committee, in fact all of council and probably the public, if you explained a little bit about the complexity of what we're dealing with here, because I've just listened to a question about filling it in. Now, what would happen to Tūnanui if you filled it in? Question number one. I know the answer, but I think some people may not really understand what this is about. So are you able just to explain to the committee what risk mitigation role this pond has been playing for Tūnanui, what the complexities are of going through this, and I'm pleased that the way you've framed your recommendation in the report is to do a business case, including more work on the estuarine option, which is only one of the things you're going to have to look at. And I think it will be helpful if you explain to the committee what the challenge may be in turning this into estuarine in terms of the consenting process you'd have to go through. This is really tough stuff. So for people that think that this is a bit of a flippant thing about modellers and boats, I think they're missing the point about the risk mitigation that's going on here, how important it is.
Through the chair, I think that's a very good question, and I'll take you back to 1998, and I promise you it's not going to be a 30-minute waltz through history. But this project had its genesis back in 1998, so that's many, many years ago, as a result of persistent and regular flooding of residents in the Tūnanui area, in terms of them being in a low-lying area. So we were constantly getting complaints about being flooded, and it was being flooded in very, very small recurrence interval rainfall events. So the 1 in 2, which was typically causing a lot of grief. The options presented back then, and this was way before I even commenced my career at the Nelson City Council, there had been a lot of work undertaken in terms of how you get the stormwater and the best mechanism for doing that away from those residents. And one of the, we always knew, well, the studies always indicated that you would need a pump station because that was the only way you could effectively get the stormwater that was inundating those properties away from those low-lying areas. The attention then turned to, well, how do you actually get that into the estuary? Now, bearing in mind, even though we had the RMA back then and we needed a resource consent, if we fast-track to where we are now, the considerations that we would be looking at now in terms of where we currently stand in a whole lot of the central government initiatives would be very, very different. So the solutions that we would have come up with back then, I think by and large, and I have looked at the solutions and I've gone back and read through the file, are by and large the same. You have a stormwater problem, you need to get the stormwater from A to Z. Z is the only place you can do it. How you get that water from A to Z is the big question. Back then in 1998, there were a number of options chosen, and the one that came out on a consideration of a range of aspects relating to, amongst other things, cost, environmental, bearing in mind that the environmental aspects now are very much different to where they were in 1998. The option that was chosen was bringing it to the modeller's pond. That may well change. If we have a look at that, I think the options, as I said, are still by and large the same. You have to get from A to Z, how best to do that. And I think that's what we will be looking at in terms of the detailed assessment. However, we have to primarily, whether it is discharged directly to the estuary or to the modeller's pond, we need to be able to get that stormwater from the low-lying areas for a Q1 and Q15 to ensure that we get no flooding. So by and large, there is a massive stormwater. So there we have the modeller's pond, but you also have a massive stormwater issue that you need to address. They're not mutually exclusive, they work hand in hand. The fact that the stormwater was ultimately chosen to discharge into the modeller's pond is a part of the analysis that took place back then. I don't believe, and I think we've made this very, very clear, that we don't believe that the stormwater issue, that the stormwater discharge into the modeller's pond has resulted in what we are facing at the moment. Irrespective of whether the stormwater was discharged into the modeller's or through some other mechanism, whatever that may be, to the estuary, we would always be faced with the modeller's pond. The stormwater aspect is one aspect of the bigger picture. The difficulty with returning it to estuarine, and we have done a little bit of work on this in anticipation of this report, is the levels. And as Councillor Barker indicated, I think there is a difference in levels, and it's not as easy as just filling it in, for example. We have high tides, we have spring tides, we have the normal tides, and it's not just a matter of converting it to a grassed area or, for that matter, a wetland. Those things all need to be looked at, not in isolation, but in terms of the bigger picture. And there is issues of hail, there is issues of levels, in terms of in relation to the tide, so it's all very complex. So it looks quite simple on the face of it, but it's not simple. In actual fact, we have had many consultants and many advisors in terms of looking at this, and this is extremely complex. So the stormwater aspect is a critical aspect, and we cannot put that aside. It has to be, whatever we do, we have to make sure that the stormwater issue is still fit for purpose, and that we are still draining those areas that will be inundated with flooding. So is that enough through the chair?
That helps, and I think through you, Mr. Chair, if just in terms of the estuarine option, and I just want some confirmation on this, in terms of looking at that, it would have to go through some sort of consenting process. And do you have any indication of whether that would be a full public notification process? Have you had those discussions with the consenting team yet?
So through the chair, yes, I have. And the view that has been given to me, and it's the view that I had arrived before actually asking the question, is that this would be a fully notified consent. And as I say, the environment that we're dealing with now is very different to 1998. And there would be a lot more work, there would be a lot more studies. Granted, we've done a lot of that work up front, but yes, I think it would be most definitely a notified consent. The environment has just changed so much since 1998.
Councillor Fulton.
Thank you. Through the chair, my question was similar to the Mayor's. I just didn't quite understand that in terms of a fully notified consent. So are you saying that if you converted it converted it into an estuarine, wetland, something environment, which you were going to then discharge your stormwater to, then because you've created a natural environment, you'd have to get a resource consent to be able to do that activity?
Through the chair, if there's a solution other than discharging into the modeller's pond, then there would be a new consent required, and that would most likely be a fully notified consent, yes.
Okay, but it would be recognised that you've created this environment partly for stormwater. I mean, presumably, if we're going to get rid of the modeller's pond and we've got to find somewhere for the stormwater to go, part of the reason for creating this natural environment is to create some kind of filtration system for the stormwater before it exits into the estuary. Is that
through the chair? I think
that's how I'm seeing it.
I think in terms, it's really difficult to say, but in terms of what solution we ultimately come up with,
yeah,
we would need a new consent to cater for whatever we've got there, whatever we do with that stormwater.
But
the modeller's pond aside.
The modeller's pond. But currently, when we create natural sumps or wetlands or areas in other parts of the city for stormwater holding, even though we might, I don't know if we get resource consents for that or not, presumably we do, but that's seen as a positive, sustainable environmental way of dealing with our stormwater.
Through the chair, yes. So just to clarify, we certainly do get consents where we have to discharge to fresh water and or other bodies of water. In terms, and I think that's the million-dollar question. This isn't just a pump station that deals with run-of-the-mill rainfall. When those pumps work in anger, there's extensive volumes of water moving through in excess of 1.5 cubic meters a second. Which is excessive, and however we deal with that going forward, in terms of whatever solution we get, we will need to show our consents department how we mitigate that. Okay. And what I'm actually saying is the environment since 1998 is very different to how we would do things now, and we would have to do a lot more, without a doubt, to show that we are mitigating the effects on the environment, not only from an erosion point of view, but from an aesthetics point of view, from a quality of water point of view.
Okay, so part of this business case will look into all of that.
Through the chair, that is the intention, yes.
And I've got one more question through the chair. I know it's a hail site, and I can't remember when we were looking at the pond option and concreting the base, were we I can't remember, I know I've asked this question before, were we intending to remove the contaminated soil, or were we intending to sort of concrete it?
We weren't intending to remove the hail. Once the hail would be extensive, that would be a big cost, and we need to consider that in any future solution. But what we were doing under this pond solution was to be essentially capping that.
We were going to
hail.
cap it.
Yeah.
But if we were looking at an estuarine environment, we might have to remove it?
There may be, depending on what we do in terms of size. If it's partly closed in, we'd be bringing in material. If we were retaining it, we may well have to remove some of that hail material. So it's not as simple as me saying yes and or no.
So final question through the chair. So as part of that business case review, you'll look at the cost of fully removing it, partially removing it, and retaining that. I don't know how much soil there is there.
Through the chair, I think what we will do is we will look at whatever we need to do to effect a solution that is a viable solution and take into consideration the constraints that we are giving, that we are faced with. The best option for that, if that is removing some of it, then so be it. If that means capping it, so be it. If that means a combination of both, so be that.
And I've got one more question, sorry. So does the current recommendation allow the staff to work towards option 3 in your, so that gives the time to, I guess I'm just a little bit confused that the recommendation.
What do you mean by option 3, just for my?
So option 3 on page 55 of the agenda.
So through the chair, just to clarify, the recommendation that officers have put in front of the committee today is that we will take a break, put the modify option on hold, and review a range of options, including the return to estuarine. That may have a number of sub-options, and we may need to well go back to the options that we were faced in 1998 to consider all of those. And there's a bit of work around that, and all we're saying is we will do a detailed business case that will present the options to councillors, including comparing that to the modify option, okay, whatever that may be.
Okay, great, thank you. If only the carpet worked.
Through the chair, if only.
Councillor Rutledge and then Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Just getting my head around the size of this, the volume of the stormwater problem. 1.5 cube a second, that's sort of river volumes, isn't it?
Sorry, I missed that word, ripper.
River volumes.
Oh, well, to give you an indication, one thing I learned at university was people don't know what a cubic is, and a cubic is 1 cubic meter a second. So my lecturer, and it's funny what you remember. I should have remembered a lot more than this, but a cubic meter is the equivalent of an old Volkswagen Beetle coming towards you every second. So if you can imagine anything of 1.5 cubics, it's 1.5 old VW Beetles coming towards you every second. That gives you a bit of context in terms of what we're dealing with. So yes, it is 1.8 cubic meters a second is a sizable flow. And one of the considerations back in 1998 was exactly that, in terms of looking at how that was mitigated if that was flowing directly into the estuary. But absolutely, at 1.5, 1.8 cubics, that is certainly getting up there in terms of the volume that would be exiting those pumps.
Okay, thank you. And the timing for how long this business case will take, how long do you expect before you can come back to us and say, right, here are all the options, we've got a very high level of confidence in the cost estimates of all of these?
So through the chair, that's a very, very good question, and it's the same question that I asked Shane. I think over the last 4 days, as I was delving a lot more into what happened in 1998 and before, I think for us to be able to do this justice, And I did indicate, I think I had answered that question previously outside of this committee, that probably by December would be a feasible option. However, I think if we are going to do this justice, I would have to say to you that for us to do that work this side of Christmas would be a bridge too far, and I would probably say we need about four or 5 months. So probably we are looking probably February, March. We really have to get this right. It's no use producing something that we come back with a plus minus 20-30%, and so I would probably say around about March. And I haven't looked at changes.
Okay. Yeah, sure, but that's quite important given this timing. So given that, and given that we're now talking about perhaps needing to deal with this through the long-term plan, does that timing allow us to include in the draft long-term plan to go out to consultation to the public, which is probably supposed to be February? Are we going to be able to achieve that?
So through the chair, we always try and work so that our estimates are. Whether we will achieve this, I don't know. If we don't, we may just have to bring this to council and figure out how we deal with that as a separate. Will we try and aim to make sure that it is included in the LTP? We always try and do that because we want it to be as comprehensive. But I don't think, to be honest, I think to do this justice, we probably, well, I don't think we'll be able to meet that timeline.
It's a very quick question, and it relates to the last part of the recommendation, which is regarding the approval of any unspent funding as a carryover to 2018-19, and I haven't got a sense in the report of what sort of money we're talking about. What is left unspent at this point in time?
So through the chair, don't have those. At the moment, we have just over 1 million and 45. It's on page 53. So in terms of doing those business cases, there's going to be substantial carryover. We're not going to use
So my question to the chair then is, does this committee have the delegations to have $1 million just sitting there, or should that have been coming back to council?
Through the chair, I think carryovers are approved by council. All I'm doing is alerting the fact that we're not going to be spending this money this financial year, because whatever we come up with and reporting back to council and doing the business case, we're certainly not going to be able to have time to go to 10 and commence this project on site. So this year's lost.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the recommendation in the report. And I don't know if you've got further questions. I'm happy to reserve my right to speak to it, or I can speak to it now, depending on whether you've got any more questions.
So you'd like to receive and move the recommendation?
I would.
Can we have a second to that? Councillor Walker.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I'm happy to speak to it now.
So, sorry, is it a question, Mr.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Levertis, do we need to brace ourselves for what might be coming with the Estrine option? I say that because I want to know, of that 690,000 you've already estimated, was there built in there infrastructure costs? Did you foresee at that time the scale, after you've outlined the scale of work that may be involved in treating the sediment and all the ramifications around the settling pond that it's acting as at the moment? Did you build into that 690 the necessary infrastructure for redirecting or coping with it within an estuarine environment?
So through the chair, in terms of bracing ourselves, if we look on page 53, 510, I've given an indication of what the environment could look like post the 690, and that the return to estuarine could be in the order of anything between 1.1 million and 1.3 million. So I've already given an indication, and granted, I accept that that's on the back of an envelope, which is exactly why we actually need to take the time to figure out what this is going to be. But it certainly, I think it's fair to say that it's going to be substantially more than the 690, which was always plus or minus 30%.
Thank you.
So there's similarity in pricing between the two options, isn't there?
Through the chair, the desktop study seems to indicate that.
Thank you. So we've had a second. Very, very quick, so I'd like to move into debate.
Question. I'm just not clear on, there was an article in the paper yesterday saying that the Modler's Pond weren't allowed to go out and fundraise, and yet it's very clear in this report that they were. I'm just not clear why that is out in the...
So through the chair, I would prefer not to comment on what the article in the newspaper was, because I haven't been privy to the discussions that have been had, and I haven't had any discussions with the modellers in terms of what they may or may not have said. So
But there was no reason why the modellers couldn't go out and fundraise?
I think it was a little bit complex. Once we knew that the price estimate was a lot higher, I think the fundraising became a lot more complex, just in terms of the lotteries, the lotteries fund, and a whole lot of other things. One of the things that the working group undertook, and as officers we undertook, to try and secure additional funding. So we worked side by side side by side but independently to try and secure funding, and every road we turned down got a roadblock, and that's when we knew that the ability for anybody to raise funds was particularly going to be difficult. But in terms of what the modellers may or may not have said, we got to a stage at the working party where trying to raise funds needed to come to a stop, because we were dealing with a bigger animal.
Thank you, Mr. Levitas. I'll move into debate. I've got Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking to this, and I thank the officers for the work that they've put into this to date, and I want to thank the modellers as well for the work that they've done to try and get this project and keep this project alive and keep this solution alive. There is potential for, when this comes back to be debated again, that actually the best deal that's ever been on the table is the one that retains the modellers' pond. And I think we've got to be mindful of that. What this is, what this is at the moment, and you could remember that, is that right now what this is doing is stopping 1 VW beetle per second of water going through the homes of people in Te Hunanui. That's what it's doing on a really bad day. On many days during the year, you would have flooding through the streets of Te Hunanui, coming into people's gardens, coming into low-lying areas in their houses. It would be a disaster. And what this project does in terms of the city is critical. So I've seen the criticism, and I've seen the criticism in the newspaper, and I've had the criticism before of, I'll just get on and fix it, it's not such a big issue. You've heard Mr. Levitas, it is incredibly complex. And what happened in 1998, as he said, in terms of consenting, is not going to meet the test now, because we care, we now have a much greater awareness around water quality. We understand that this is in a coastal environment. We've got erosion issues potentially if you have one VW beetle a second pouring out on the back beach, and what could happen there. It's going to take a lot of technology, a lot of science. They are going to have to commission engineers, they're going to have to commission water quality scientists, they're going to have to look at a lot of aspects to this to get it to work if we move away from that pond. Because that pond, as unpleasant as it is at the moment, and has been with the algal and the weed growth in there, which was there before the stormwater went into it, and that's all through the consent, the 1998 consent telling you that, has actually been protecting the homes and businesses of Te Hunanui now for nearly 20 years. And we should be very grateful for the fact that that modellers' pond has been there, because without it we would have had a really big problem. Now if we take it out, then we're going to have another solution. We can't do nothing, because you now understand what the issue is. It's a big issue to solve. So I'm glad that this is at this committee. It's here because it's part of a reserve, sits in the reserve, and yes, you've had to grapple this one, and thank you for showing the leadership, Mr. Chair, in taking this and keeping it your committee, because if you delayed it and pushed it somewhere else, all you did is create more delay, more time wasted trying to get us through to a point where we actually have got the project in front of us. And I have to say that this is one which has bothered me for quite some time over successive councils, because having known a little bit about this consent in 1988, which predates my time on council but didn't predate my time doing resource management work, I had a fair idea of what was going to happen if you had to take the modellers' pond out of the equation. So if you can keep the modellers' pond in there, it's not great how it is at the moment in terms of the amenity. I don't like it, nobody likes it. But before you start dismissing the modellers' pond as some sort of historical fancy, which it's not, understand the critical health and safety role that this pond plays for the people of Te Hunanui. And think of them before you start dismissing this as just some sort of historical desire for people who are going back to their boyhood or girlhood and floating boats, and that's all it's about. I didn't live in the city and have any association with the Modellers Pond in terms of sailing boats with my grandparents. That's not my interest in it. My interest in it is looking after the people of Te Hunanui and stopping them being flooded.
Thank you. Councillor Laurie, I appreciate you're not on the committee, but I'll allow you.
What? It happens in other committees.
I'll let you keep to the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. So obviously, I don't think anyone wants Te Hunanui to flood. No one wants that. But what concerns me is what I'm hearing sounds like, Tina, there is no alternative. There are alternatives to the Modellers Pond, and I think we owe it to explore those alternatives. I think too much time and money and energy has been spent on this issue over decades for it to get parked again. And I think actually the responsible thing to do would be for this committee to refer it up to full council for us to make a decision on this issue as a full council, or actually take the brave move of making a decision regarding the future of the modify option and actually go, well, 1.7 is not going to work. It's just not going to work, and we're going to have to actually reject that option and look at alternatives. Now, I'm not on this committee, so I can't put that up, but I would encourage someone else on this committee to put it up, because otherwise I think this thing is just going to keep dragging on, and that's one of the reasons I was so keen to get it resolved in the last term of council, because people have had enough of it. They want it sorted.
Councillor McGurk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first car was a Volkswagen Beetle. Yeah, 1264 was a dog. So, but I know what a cubic is. Look, I'll speak in support of this of the motion reluctantly. And I think it's probably a realisation that perhaps the nostalgic or whimsical view of some around the community has probably clouded the options, because this is a decision that we should have made 12 months ago. This is a decision that these same options were put before, and we discarded some of them. We went down this particular rabbit hole. Anyway, bring it back. I need to consider all the options. I appreciate the advice from the officers, but in the meantime, the decision that we've delayed for 12 months, costs have gone up, and people are still waiting. So I'm glad to see that we're at least going to put forward all the options on the table, and we can at least make an informed decision without zeroing in on one particular option and discarding others.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak in support of it. As chair of the subcommittee that looked at the detail of it, there was real enthusiasm to get some sort of fix. And when we started the work with that subcommittee, there was a genuine feeling that, hey, we get our teeth into it and we will come out with a solution within the $1.2 million. However, the more we looked at the detail, it became apparent, and the complexity built up on us. So that is that. I do believe that the concerns about the flooding issues are the major concern. The byproduct of whatever the fix will be, if we go to the actual modified pond eventually, if that is the chosen route, a byproduct will be that the modellers will have an area to use. But I think we need to put the emotion relating to that completely to one side and address the problem, which is the Te Hunanui stormwater detention issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's high time we just called this what it is, which is a major piece of stormwater infrastructure. So calling it a modeller's pond, if we were talking about spending $1.7 million on somewhere to play with some toy boats, then that would be ridiculous. And I know some people want to steer the conversation in that direction. For what ends, I just don't know. But we are talking about something that is critical to Te Hunanui and making sure people's homes don't flood. So the report that's come up, and even the back of the envelope estimates, is suggesting that the difference between going ahead with the solution that we know, that the officers have a very high level of confidence in, and some other option which we don't know much about yet, is probably only going to be 300 or 400k. And if we are looking at 300 or 400k over a 30-year lifespan of a piece of infrastructure, that's actually pretty small change. So the brave decision here is not let's scrap the fix option and just go return to estuary. The brave decision here would actually be to go, we've got a solution that our officers have a very high level of confidence in. The difference in money between any other option and this is not going to be significant, and actually we should just get on and do it. Now I appreciate that's not the mood of the committee here now, but that would be the brave decision. I do support it staying and this committee making the decision to at least progress with the further work, and certainly wouldn't support kicking it to any other, up to full council or anywhere else.
Thank you. Councillor Barker and then Councillor Fulton.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. The discussion today has been useful for everyone concerned to understand more, particularly the complexities of the situation. And I was happy to ask my question that I did in order to get that brought into attention. I support the recommendation. I'm forever hopeful that that we will have a stormwater system that works, as well as a pond which is clean water and healthy and safe. And if this further investigation for the business case can look into the details and all the possibilities, and who knows what may come up next, I think it's a good move that we continue on. The difference between the two options at 1 and 2 are only a few $100,000. It's not huge in the context of what we really are spending. And Councillor Rutledge is right that in another world we might have moved more quickly to the 1.7 and it wouldn't have come through this committee at all. But it has, and that's where we stand, and I'm supporting this approach, and I appreciate the work that the Working Party has done, and just hope that we will, maybe next year, get to the end of it.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Fulton.
I'm going to support this, but it is my preference that it goes to council the next time round, because I do think that this is actually much bigger than sports and rec, and if it's in fact a stormwater issue, then it's probably a works and infrastructure issue, and yet there's also some environmental effects as well in terms of contaminated sites. So I think that it is, it's clear this is not about model boats, this is actually about stormwater issues and environmental impacts, and ensuring that our estuarine environment is taken good care of. So if anyone would second me, I would prefer that it be amended slightly, because at the moment there's 3 options as to whether it will go back to works and infrastructure or sports and rec or to council. It's my preference that it goes back to council, the business case, because I think that there's so many issues at play here, and I think that it's probably fair that the whole council gets a chance to look at it. Anyone want a second? So how do the officers decide if it's
There's no second to that. I've got
All right, I'll just speak. So I'm going to support the recommendation. I think it's important that this is done, but I do think that because it's such a large sum of money and it is actually about stormwater, then it's important that we look at a business case from that approach. Whereas up until now, I guess they've gone hand in hand in terms of modelers and stormwater. We've had 2 issues, but actually what we're seeing now is that what's most important to address is the stormwater issue and the estuarine environment and what we do with that contaminated soil or the hail site.
Thank
so
you.
for me, that's the priority.
I think I'll speak and then write a reply for Madam Mayor. It should be called Tahuna Pond. It's probably been easily remembered as Modeller's Pond, but I think it's put the public in the wrong frame on that. And the discussion here that, we should wait for looking at some alternatives, I'm not sure where those particular councillors have been for the last 3 years, but we looked at all the alternatives, we thrashed alternatives, and we took it all by the horns, and we went with a decision to get what was the best bang for buck, the best community use, and a very prudent. But when you do a job like this, as you can see, it's a large job. It's not just a case of getting the shovel out. It's a large job. You've got to get the correct business case, the correct experts, and we were prudent to get a quantity surveyor to go, and that's where the cost has gone out to what we were originally happy to support. So that's why it's come back to here, to make sure we have a prudent decision out of those two options that we had. This decision will go back to Sport Rec or Works Infrastructure. And I was also just disappointed. Obviously, the public aren't always privy to all these. They can be, and always privy to all the discussions that we've had leading up to it, and it's easy to forget. I was disappointed that the public felt that it was just a case of filling it in, we save $1 million, and we give it to some other good group. I was also disappointed for the attack on leadership, and I was disappointed for a fellow councillor to use Facebook, well knowing the workshops, the meetings we've had, and then just criticise leadership on this role. When the leadership was taken, a lack of leadership would have been on, we'll just wait to the next council to find a magic bullet, or let's just keep cleaning the ever-growing cost from a 45,000 to a couple of 100,000 to try and clean out the pond. And as we found, the community let us very clearly know that that wasn't good enough, just cleaning the pond. It grew back in the summer, just in a few days, over winter maybe a few weeks. So we did take a strong leadership decision. Some councillors, unfortunately, and public were then led to believe that, like I said before, that was just a case of filling in, save $1 million, put it somewhere else. We would have done that a long time ago if that was the case. We were stuck with $1 million decision, $1 million plus decision, and we made a decision to go one or the other. We took by the horns, and we were very prudent to make sure we kept on top of it. The working party, the idea of a working party, as you may have forgotten, is that to make sure it was kept on track, that we weren't going to get a blowout. As soon as we saw there was an inkling of a potential blowout, it may have seemed like a delay. When we talk about, we're delaying it another 12 months, no, it's not a delay, it's been prudent. Make sure we got a independent review of those quantity surveys, because we were hopeful that they were wrong. We got independent, and it showed no, those quantity survey figures have ballooned. So this is why we're at this, and it's not holding, it's not avoiding, this is grabbing by the horns and saying, right, we need to look at the other option, estuarine, where that still, if that lines up with not modifying the pond, and we'll get that report very shortly, and we will do a thorough. And it was very clear that we couldn't do a thorough on every single option on the table, and this is where we're at. So I'm very glad that we've got a great support around the table. I think it's unanimous support to go ahead and get the case study done, bring it back to committee, and then move us forward this Tahuna pond, whether it's an estuarine or a modified pond. And it wasn't about boats, it was about the community, it was about stormwater, it was about looking after the Tahuna community. It was disappointing that if we didn't do something, you're really putting the Tahuna community second as far as flooding. I think I've said enough. Councillor, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I will exercise my right to reply. You didn't have this decision in front of you 1 year ago, and you haven't delayed for 1 year. You didn't have costs of 1.7 million in front of you, as you said, Mr Chair. You had a budget of 1.2. And what the working group has done is they've gone away, and as they should, and exactly what I expect from you as Mayor, is that you'll go away and you will use due diligence and bring back matters considering financial prudence. Now, you could, as a committee, decided today that no, 1.7, as Councillor Rutledge said, is where you're going to go. But I think the ratepayers of Nelson at 1.7 actually expect you to have considered the other options. I think they would expect you, before you signed it out, to say, were there any other options? Now, what you know from Mr Levertis is that the options are probably pretty similar to what they were in 1998. We haven't done an estuarine solution like this for stormwater in the coast marine environment. that would be something new, but it's worth exploring, and it may be the best option yet. But at the moment, there's quite a long way to go to look at that option, and so you couldn't sign that out either. You wouldn't have had any idea really what the consenting regime would be, even whether you'll get consent. You may go through this process and find that it's not only the Modeller's Pond that's going to have to be addressed, you may find it's the Centennial Park, Centennial Avenue pump station. And there may be some other things that have got interventions that have got to go back up there because, as you know, fairly major parts of the city where there's old pipework have infiltration issues in them. And you may find that if you decide to take the Modeller's Pond out, you're going to have a whole lot of things that have to happen to get through your consent, because getting a consent in 2017 or 2018 is going to be tougher in terms of the environmental outcomes, as it should be. This is our, often described as our jewel in the crown, Te Hunanui Beach, and it deserves to have the best quality water that it possibly can. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement still there. We need to be improving that. And those of you who were at the P&R committee the other day will know that we're sending up an activity management plan to council with a very clear message that we're wanting to lift the level of service on environmental issues. And so that's coming through. This is actually part of that. And I think you're doing absolutely the right thing as elected members by making sure that you have got well-informed options, that you're undertaking due diligence, because you're looking to commit a significant amount of ratepayer money. And I would expect you to have options. You can do this at this committee, and it's right that you do, because if you don't do that, essentially what you're going to do is kick this into next year. Because by the time it gets around the next cycle of meetings, Mr. Laverdis is going to have no time to commission the people that he's going to need to start working on this, because he will need to get some external advice. And I wish the team well with this. This is going to be a really complex issue. The modelers I know may not be happy with us. Right, I understand that. I know that they really would like us to retain that pond as is and get on and do that project. And I understand that they won't necessarily be happy about this outcome, but I think the right thing for you to do as elected members, for us to do as elected members, is to recognise the significance of this for the people of Te Hunanui, the flood risk that is there, the environmental complexity, and make sure when it comes back to us, because inevitably, you've got a big sum of money you're going to have to spend, and it's going to have to be seen in the context of all the other pressures on our budgets as we go through. You may find, and I hope it isn't the case, but you may find the only thing you can do is to retain that pond and continue to clean it. That may be where you end up. You just don't know. So for the councillors who've sat here and said, we had all of this in front of us a year ago, you didn't. You didn't have that due diligence, and you didn't have the quantity surveyor information, and now you're moving to making what is a properly informed decision. And it's not going to be an easy one, but in the meantime, we just have to say, thank goodness the jolly old Modeller's Pond, even in its filthy state, is there, protecting those homes and those businesses in Te Hunanui until we can come up with another solution.
Thank you. That's the end of the debate. I'll put the motion, and we've got this as a whole. Put the motion and receiving this report. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a quick question? It's about
no. So we're moving to the next item. We've got memorandum of understanding. I'll just take a brief adjournment to ensure we're in the staff and that are available for that. Just give a chance to say, stretch your legs, stretch your jaws, stretch your arms, and give me 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. So receiving the report. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barker and Councillor Courtney. We got that. So we've, as you said, got the MOU report for the mountain biking group. We've got the two staff members here, Paul and Rosie, sorry, all those days. Paul and Rosie have been calling people Gail and Noonan. Paul and Rosie, cheers, thank you.
Well, we very much take the report taken as read. It is a high-level document that really just outlines how council will work communication with the Mountain Bike Club. So it sets some good parameters for both organisations. And I think after Ian's presentation this morning of letting you know how we've worked on this together and where it's come from, I'm just happy to take any questions from here through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie.
One question. Yeah, Mr. Chair. Who actually wrote it?
It was very much a joint effort.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So we've received, second of that, we'll go straight to debate. So debate on the motion, we've got Councillor Rutledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Paul
Chair.
Rosie. Thank you for that. Very good. That's obviously well put report, and the two groups come together and get something on the table without too much obstacle. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very pleased to have this document up in front of the committee for signing today. It's been something that we've put considerable effort into, and really changing the dynamic of how council and the mountain bike club work together. I've been incredibly impressed by the new mountain bike club committee, their positive professional attitude towards all of these dealings, their willingness to engage with council and work together to provide great results for Nelson, both for our residents, but also in terms of working to unlock the tourism potential and economic benefit to the city that being really world class in this space could potentially provide us. So yeah, very, very pleased, and certainly see this as a positive way forward for us.
Thank you. Alex and Cassie, is anything, I'm sure we move into public excluded shortly after this, so if there's anything you wanted to add on that? No, very good. You mountain bikers yourselves or walkers? No, all good. You must. They're still after new members. Anyone else would like to speak? No, very good. Thank you. I'll put the motion that we received in regards to the memorandum of understanding. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Yep.
Excluded. Tomorrow, just so everybody's aware, the Fringe Hill track is opening, which is a really exciting development. It's right from the top of Fringe Hill all the way down. It's going to be one of the longest descent tracks. Probably it will be the longest descent track that we have in Nelson, so I get the job of crash test dummy going down there tomorrow, I think, and we'll be doing a little bit of filming and putting that together so we can promote that to the good people of Nelson and people who come through the eyesight and other places and get to see what the trails and whole scenery around Nelson and mountain biking is about. So yeah, that's a great first example of, because there has been a lot of work between council and mountain bike club on that project, and so that's really a great first milestone straight after this MOU. As to how we're working together positively, so that's quite exciting.
Cheers, and yes, you can borrow my fat tyre bike, oversized frame. Just look after it.